The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of First National Bank as Gloria Wilson pushed open the heavy glass door. At 68, she moved with the careful dignity that comes from decades of standing before classrooms of rowdy students. Today was special. After 35 years of teaching, scrimping, saving, and working summer jobs to put her son through college, she was finally going to deposit the check he had sent her, a thank you for all her sacrifices. The bank buzzed with the usual Monday morning activity. People lined up in neat rows, separated by velvet ropes, shuffling forward one step at a time. Gloria clutched her handbag close to her side, feeling the envelope with the check inside. It was more money than she had ever seen at once, enough to finally fix the leaking roof and maybe even take that trip to see her sister down in Florida. She watched as the young man behind counter 3 efficiently processed customers. His name tag read Thomas. His movements were quick and practiced, his smile appearing and disappearing with each new person who stepped up to his window. Gloria counted 4 people ahead of her in line. An older gentleman with a cane was helped to the front by a kind bank employee. Gloria smiled. She didn't mind waiting a little longer. A young mother tried to quiet her fussing baby while simultaneously checking her phone. 2 businessmen in nearly identical suits discussed something in hushed tones. Finally, it was Gloria's turn. She approached Thomas's window with a warm smile. "Good morning," she said, placing her worn leather purse on the counter. Thomas barely looked up from his computer. "How can I help you today?" His tone suggested he'd said those exact words hundreds of times already that morning. "I'd like to deposit this check, please," Gloria said, carefully removing the envelope from her purse. Her son had overnighted it to her with a sweet card that had made her cry happy tears. She unfolded the check and slid it under the glass partition. Thomas glanced at the check, then did a double take. His fingers froze over his keyboard. His eyes darted from the check to Gloria and back again. "Ma'am, could you tell me where you got this check?" His voice had changed, becoming harder, suspicious. Gloria blinked, confused by his shift in tone. "It's from my son. He sent it to me as a gift." Thomas's eyebrows rose so high they nearly disappeared into his hairline. "Your son gave you a check for $50,000? People in the line behind Gloria began to shift impatiently. She felt her cheeks grow warm. "Yes, he's doing very well in his career now. And he wanted to thank me for—" "I'll need to see some ID," Thomas cut her off, extending his hand. Gloria fumbled in her purse for her wallet, pulling out her driver's license. She slid it under the partition. Thomas examined it closely, looking back and forth between her face and the photo on the ID. "This address doesn't match what's on the check," he said flatly. "That's because the check has my son's address on it," Gloria explained, her voice still pleasant but with a slight tremor now. "He's the account holder. I'm just depositing it." Thomas's mouth formed a thin line. "And you say this is your son? What does he do that allows him to write checks this size?" The people in line behind Gloria were growing restless. She could feel their eyes on her back, could almost hear their thoughts. What was taking so long? Why was this old woman holding up the line? "He works in banking, actually," Gloria said, her voice growing smaller. "He recently got a promotion." Thomas let out a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Banking, really? And what bank would that be?" Gloria straightened her shoulders slightly. "This one, actually. Well, the parent company." The change in Thomas was immediate. His face hardened and he pushed her ID back under the glass. "Ma'am, I don't appreciate people coming in here with fraudulent checks and made-up stories." "Fraudulent?" Gloria's voice rose in disbelief. "There's nothing fraudulent about that check. My son sent it to me. If you just call him, he can verify." "I don't need to call anyone," Thomas said loudly enough that people at neighboring counters turned to look. "We deal with scammers every day. Usually they're smart enough to come up with better stories in smaller amounts." Gloria felt her hands begin to shake. "Young man, I am not a scammer. That check is perfectly legitimate. I taught elementary school for 35 years. I've never broken a law in my life." Thomas picked up the check, holding it between his fingers as if it might contaminate him. "Do you know what happens to people who try to commit bank fraud, ma'am? It's a federal crime." Before Gloria could respond, Thomas did something that made the world seem to stop. With quick, deliberate movements, he tore the check in half, then in quarters. The sound of ripping paper cut through the sudden silence of the bank lobby. "What are you doing?" Gloria gasped, reaching helplessly toward the shredded pieces of paper. "You can't do that." I've just saved you from making a very big mistake, Thomas said coldly. I suggest you leave now before I call security. And don't try this at any of our other branches. We flag accounts that attempt fraud. Gloria stood frozen, staring at the torn pieces of her son's check. $50,000, torn to shreds because this young man had taken one look at her, an older black woman in a simple dress and sensible shoes, and decided she couldn't possibly have a son successful enough to give her such a gift. I'd like to speak to your manager, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. My manager will tell you the same thing, Thomas replied, already looking past her to the next customer in line. Next, please. But the woman behind Gloria didn't step forward. The entire line had gone quiet, witnesses to something they knew wasn't right but weren't sure how to address. A young bank employee who had been watching from a desk nearby approached. Is everything okay here? She asked, her eyes moving between Gloria and Thomas. Everything's fine, Diane, Thomas said dismissively, just handling a potential fraud situation. Diane looked at Gloria, noting the tears that had begun to well in the older woman's eyes. Ma'am, would you like me to call the branch manager? Before Gloria could answer, Thomas cut in again. That won't be necessary. The customer was just leaving. Gloria looked at the torn check, at Thomas's cold face, at the curious onlookers. The humiliation burned through her like fire. Without another word, she gathered her purse and her dignity and walked toward the exit on legs that felt like they might give way at any moment. Outside in the bright sunshine, she leaned against the cool brick wall of the bank building, trying to catch her breath. Her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone and dialed her son's number. As it rang, a single tear slid down her cheek. What she didn't know, what Thomas the teller certainly didn't know, was that her son wasn't just any bank employee. And the storm that was about to rain down on First National Bank would change everything. Gloria's hands trembled as she held the phone to her ear, waiting for her son to pick up. She had moved to a small bench away from the bank entrance, not wanting anyone to see her in this state. The third ring cut off mid-sound. Hey, Mom, came the warm, familiar voice of her son. Did you get to the bank okay? Gloria took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Anthony, something happened. She couldn't keep the quiver from her voice. There was an immediate shift in Anthony's tone. Mom, what's wrong? Are you all right? I'm fine, just... Gloria paused, the humiliation washing over her again. The teller at the bank, he tore up your check. Right in front of everyone. He did what? The volume of Anthony's voice made Gloria pull the phone slightly away from her ear. He didn't believe it was real, she explained, her voice small. He thought I was trying to commit fraud. He didn't even call to verify, just accused me and tore it up. The silence on the other end of the line was so complete that Gloria wondered if the call had dropped. Then she heard Anthony take a slow, controlled breath. Which branch did you go to, Mom? His voice was now eerily calm. The one on Maple Street. It's closest to my house. What was the teller's name? Thomas, his name tag said Thomas, another pause. Mom, I want you to go home and rest. I'll handle this. Anthony, please don't make a fuss. I can just... No, Mom. His voice was firm but gentle. This isn't okay. Not at all. Go home, make yourself some tea. I'll call you back in a little while. After saying goodbye, Gloria sat on the bench for a few more minutes, gathering her composure. The morning that had started with such promise now felt tainted. She couldn't shake the feeling of all those eyes on her, the judgment, the assumption that she was trying to pull some sort of scam. Inside the bank, Thomas had already moved on to the next customer, though his hands worked more quickly than usual, his movements sharp with lingering adrenaline. Diane, the young woman who had approached during the incident, watched him from her desk with a troubled expression. When there was finally a lull in the line, Diane approached Thomas's window. Was that really necessary? She asked in a low voice. Thomas rolled his eyes. You've been here, what, 3 months? Trust me, you get a feel for these things. No way that check was legitimate, but you didn't even verify it. You could have called the account holder and waste more time. Look at that line. Besides, her story made no sense. Her son is some big shot at corporate? Please, he shook his head. You know how many scammers target banks every day? Hundreds, they're getting smarter too. Using old ladies as fronts, Diane frowned. She didn't look like a front for anything. She looked like someone's grandmother who just got humiliated. Thomas's face hardened. Look, I saved this bank from a $50,000 fraud attempt. If anything, I should get a bonus. He turned away, signaling the end of the conversation. Diane walked away, still troubled. She considered mentioning the incident to Lisa Chen, the branch manager, but hesitated. Thomas had been at the bank for 5 years while she was still new. Who would Lisa believe? Meanwhile, in a sleek corner office 40 floors up in the downtown headquarters of National Financial Group, Anthony Wilson ended his call with his mother and stared out at the city skyline. At 38, he had recently been appointed CEO of the entire banking division, which included First National Bank and its hundreds of branches across the country. The journey from the small apartment where his mother had raised him to this office had been long and hard-fought. Every step of the way, his mother had been there, sacrificing everything to give him opportunities. Working multiple jobs to put him through college, encouraging him when the challenges seemed insurmountable. And now, when he'd finally been able to give something back to her, she had been treated like a criminal. Anthony's assistant knocked lightly on his open door. "Your 10 o'clock is here. Cancel it," Anthony said without turning around. "Cancel everything for the morning. And get me a car to the Maple Street branch of First National." The assistant, used to Anthony's decisive manner, simply nodded. "Right away. Is everything okay?" Anthony finally turned from the window, his face unreadable. "It will be." 30 minutes later, Anthony's driver pulled up in front of the Maple Street branch. Instead of his usual tailored suit, Anthony had changed into jeans and a simple button-down shirt. He wasn't here as the CEO today, at least not yet. "Wait here," he told the driver. "This won't take long." Inside, the bank was less busy now. Anthony stood in the lobby observing. He spotted Thomas immediately at counter 3, still processing customers with the same efficiency he had shown earlier, though perhaps with less warmth. Lisa Chen, the branch manager, was at her desk behind a glass partition, typing on her computer. Anthony had met her at several corporate functions, but in his casual clothes and without context, she didn't recognize him as he approached. "Good morning," she said with a professional smile. "How can I help you today?" "I'd like to speak with you about an incident that occurred earlier this morning," Anthony said calmly. "Involving a teller named Thomas." Lisa's smile faltered slightly. "Are you a customer who had a problem with Thomas?" "I'm sure we can sort this out." "I'm not a customer," Anthony said. "But my mother is. Or she was trying to be, until Thomas tore up her check and accused her of fraud in front of a lobby full of people." Lisa's expression shifted to concern. "I'm very sorry to hear that. Can you tell me more about what happened?" As Anthony began to explain, he noticed Lisa's eyes widening slightly. He realized she was finally placing his face, recognizing who he was despite the casual attire. "Mr. Wilson," she said quietly, her voice suddenly tense. "I had no idea. Please, let's continue this conversation in my office." As they walked to her private office, Anthony noticed Thomas watching them curiously from his counter. The teller's eyes narrowed as he tried to place where he might have seen Anthony before. In Lisa's office, she closed the door and turned to Anthony with an expression of alarm. "Mr. Wilson, I want to assure you that whatever happened, it does not reflect the values or procedures of this branch or First National Bank. If Thomas behaved inappropriately..." Anthony held up his hand. "I don't want assurances right now, Ms. Chen. I want to understand exactly what happened. And then I want to speak with Thomas." Lisa nodded nervously. "Of course. Let me call him in." She picked up her phone and dialed an extension. "Thomas, could you please come to my office when you've finished with your current customer?" "Thank you." As they waited, Anthony remained standing, his gaze fixed on the lobby through the glass walls of Lisa's office. He could see Thomas finishing up with a customer, glancing nervously toward the office. "Ms. Chen," Anthony said without looking at her, "do you know who I am?" "Yes, sir," she replied. "You're Anthony Wilson, the new CEO of National Financial Group's banking division. And do you know who Gloria Wilson is?" Lisa hesitated, connecting the dots. "Your mother?" Anthony nodded slowly, finally turning to look at her. "My mother, who taught elementary school for 35 years, who worked nights and weekends cleaning offices to put me through college, who has never asked for anything in return, until today when she tried to deposit a check I sent her and was treated like a criminal." Lisa's face had gone pale. "Mr. Wilson, I am so sorry. I had no idea this had happened. I wasn't informed." A knock at the door interrupted them. Thomas stood there looking uncertain. Lisa gestured for him to enter. "Thomas," she said, her voice slightly higher than normal. "This is Anthony Wilson. He'd like to speak with you about an incident this morning." Thomas stepped into the office, his eyes moving between Lisa and Anthony. "What incident?" Anthony studied the young man's face. "An elderly black woman came to your window this morning with a check for $50,000. Do you remember what happened?" Thomas's expression shifted from confusion to defensiveness. "Oh, that. Yeah, it was an obvious fraud attempt. The check was supposedly from her son, but it was way too large and didn't match her profile. I followed protocol for suspected fraud." "Protocol?" Anthony's voice was dangerously quiet. "Is it protocol at First National to tear up checks without verification? To publicly humiliate customers? To make assumptions based on how someone looks?" Thomas's confidence began to falter. "Sir, with all due respect, we get scammers in here all the time. That check didn't pass the smell test." "And what exactly," Anthony asked, stepping closer, "did not pass your smell test? The fact that an older black woman in simple clothes was trying to deposit a large check? Or was there some other factor I'm missing?" The office fell silent as Thomas seemed to struggle for a response. Outside in the lobby, employees and customers continued their day, unaware of the storm brewing behind the glass walls of Lisa's office. Thomas shifted his weight from one foot to the other, uncomfortable under Anthony's steady gaze. The silence in the office stretched like a rubber band pulled too tight. It wasn't about how she looked, Thomas finally said, though his voice lacked conviction. It was about the situation. The check just didn't make sense. What didn't make sense about it? Anthony pressed, his voice level but intense. The amount? The fact that it was from her son? "Please explain your thought process to me." Thomas glanced at Lisa, hoping for support but found none. "Look, it was a judgment call. She claimed the check was from her son, who supposedly works for this bank's parent company. It sounded like a made-up story." "A made-up story," Anthony repeated slowly. He turned to Lisa. "Ms. Chen, would you mind giving us the room for a moment? I'd like to speak with Thomas privately." Lisa nodded quickly. "Of course." She hurried out, closing the door behind her. Anthony gestured to the chairs in front of Lisa's desk. "Let's sit." Thomas hesitated, then took a seat. Anthony sat across from him, leaning forward slightly. "Thomas, how long have you worked for First National?" 5 years, Thomas replied, his posture stiff. "And in those 5 years, have you ever torn up another customer's check?" Thomas blinked. "No, I see." Anthony nodded thoughtfully. "So this was the first time you felt it necessary to physically destroy a financial document, rather than following standard verification procedures." "The situation was different," Thomas insisted, a defensive edge creeping into his voice. "Different how?" Anthony asked. When Thomas didn't immediately respond, he continued. "Let me tell you a story, Thomas, about a woman who graduated college in 1980, wanted to be a writer, but instead took a teaching job because it was steady work, who raised her son alone after her husband died suddenly when the boy was just 7, who never bought new clothes for herself so her growing son could have what he needed." Thomas's eyes darted around the room, anywhere but Anthony's face. "This woman," Anthony continued, "worked every summer painting houses, cleaning offices at night, tutoring other people's children on weekends. Also, her son could attend a good college, could have opportunities she never had. And when that son finally made it, when he finally reached a position where he could give something back to the mother who sacrificed everything, she was treated like a criminal, in public, by someone who took one look at her and decided she didn't deserve to be believed." A slight flush had risen to Thomas's cheeks. "Sir, I didn't know." "No, you didn't know," Anthony cut him off. "You didn't know because you didn't try to know. You didn't ask questions. You didn't call the account holder to verify. You didn't even bother to check if the signature matched the one on file. You made a snap judgment based on what you saw. An older black woman who couldn't possibly have a legitimate reason to deposit a large check." "That's not fair," Thomas protested weakly. "It wasn't about her race or age. Then what was it about?" Anthony's question hung in the air. Thomas opened his mouth, then closed it again. Anthony leaned back slightly. "Have you ever heard of unconscious bias, Thomas?" "Of course," Thomas replied, his tone suggesting he was offended by the implication. "We had training on that last year." "And what did you learn?" Thomas sighed. "That everyone has hidden biases they may not be aware of. That we need to question our assumptions about people." "And yet," Anthony said quietly, When my mother stood at your window this morning, you didn't question your assumptions at all, did you? You acted on them, decisively, destructively. Realization dawned slowly on Thomas's face. Your mother? He whispered, the color draining from his cheeks. The woman this morning was your mother? Anthony nodded. Gloria Wilson. 35 years teaching 3rd grade at Lincoln Elementary. The check you tore up was my gift to her. A thank you for everything she's done for me. Thomas looked as if he might be ill. Mr. Wilson, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. If I had known, that's exactly the problem, Anthony interrupted. You shouldn't need to know that someone's son is the CEO for them to be treated with dignity and respect. Every person who walks through those doors deserves the same level of service, the same benefit of the doubt, the same adherence to protocol, regardless of how they look, how they dress, or how believable you find their story. Thomas sat in stunned silence. Do you know what my mother said to me on the phone? Anthony continued, his voice softening slightly. She asked me not to make a fuss. After being humiliated in public, accused of fraud, and having a check for $50,000 destroyed in front of her, her concern was that I might make things uncomfortable for you. He shook his head. That's the kind of person you judged as untrustworthy today. Outside the glass walls of the office, Lisa hovered nervously, watching the interaction while pretending to organize papers at a nearby desk. Other employees had begun to notice that something unusual was happening. Diane, who had witnessed the earlier incident with Gloria, observed with particular interest. So what happens now? Thomas asked, his voice small. Anthony considered him for a long moment. That depends partly on you, Thomas. I'm not here to fire you, though I certainly could. I'm here because what happened to my mother this morning happens to people every day in banks across this country. People make assumptions based on appearances, and those assumptions have real consequences. Thomas nodded slowly. I want you to tell me, honestly, do you understand what went wrong this morning? Not just that you happened to mistreat the CEO's mother, but the fundamental problem with how you approached the situation. Thomas took a deep breath. I made assumptions without evidence. I didn't follow proper verification procedures. I let my biases affect my judgment. And if you could go back, what would you do differently? I would verify the check, Thomas said immediately. I would call the account holder. I would treat her with respect, regardless of whether I thought the check was suspicious. Anthony nodded. Good, that's a start. He stood up. Now I'd like you to come with me. We're going to have a larger conversation, including Ms. Chen and anyone else who witnessed what happened this morning. As they exited the office, Lisa straightened up, trying to look as if she hadn't been watching. Ms. Chen, Anthony called, could you gather your staff in the conference room? And Diane as well. He had noticed the young woman watching them with interest. Lisa nodded quickly. Of course, Mr. Wilson, right away. Within minutes, the branch's 15 employees were gathered in the small conference room at the back of the bank. A sign on the door informed customers that some tellers were temporarily unavailable. Whispers circulated as everyone wondered why the CEO of their parent company was there in casual clothes, looking so serious. Anthony stood at the front of the room, with Thomas and Lisa seated nearby. Diane sat in the back, watching intently. Good morning, everyone, Anthony began. For those who don't know me, I'm Anthony Wilson, CEO of National Financial Group's banking division. I'm here today because something happened in this branch this morning that concerns me deeply, not just as your CEO, but as a human being. The room fell silent as Anthony described what had happened to Gloria. He didn't immediately reveal that she was his mother, instead focusing on the facts of how she had been treated. Many eyes turned toward Thomas, who kept his gaze fixed on the table in front of him. I want to be clear, Anthony continued. This isn't about one incident or one employee. This is about a culture that allows snap judgments to override procedure. That permits assumptions based on appearance to determine how we treat customers. Lisa raised her hand tentatively. Mr. Wilson, I want to assure you that what happened this morning is not representative of how we typically operate. We have strict protocols for verifying checks. But those protocols weren't followed, Anthony pointed out. And I have to wonder, is this the first time? Or just the first time someone complained to me directly? The uncomfortable silence that followed was answer enough. I'd like to hear from anyone who witnessed the interaction this morning, Anthony said, looking around the room. Who else was present when this customer tried to deposit her check? Diane raised her hand. I was nearby, sir. I saw most of what happened. Please tell us what you observed, Anthony encouraged. Diane glanced at Thomas before speaking. The customer, Gloria, came to Thomas's window with a check. She was polite, but Thomas became suspicious right away. He questioned her but didn't seem to believe her explanations. When she said her son worked for the bank's parent company, Thomas... She hesitated. Go on, Anthony said gently. Thomas laughed it off. Then he tore up her check and threatened to call security if she didn't leave. Murmurs rippled through the room. Did anyone try to intervene? Anthony asked. Diane looked down. I asked if she wanted to speak to a manager, but Thomas said it wasn't necessary. That she was leaving. Anthony nodded thoughtfully. Thank you for your honesty, Diane. He turned to address the entire room again. The customer in question was my mother, Gloria Wilson. The effect was immediate. Eyes widened, a few gasps escaped, and every person in the room sat up straighter. But that's not why I'm here, Anthony continued. I'm not here because my mother was mistreated. I'm here because a customer was mistreated, and that is unacceptable, regardless of who they are or who they know. The weight of his words settled over the room. No one spoke. So, Anthony said, his voice taking on a more determined tone, we have a choice to make. We can treat this as an isolated incident, a simple mistake, or we can recognize it as a symptom of a larger problem, one that requires real change. I know which option I'm choosing. The question is, which will you choose? The conference room remained silent after Anthony's question. Employees exchanged uncomfortable glances, no one quite sure how to respond. Finally, Lisa spoke up. Mr. Wilson, we all want to do better, she said carefully. What do you suggest we do moving forward? Anthony looked around the room, making eye contact with each person. First, I want to understand if what happened today is truly an isolated incident, or if it's part of a pattern. He turned to Thomas. You said you've worked here for 5 years. In that time, have you ever refused service or suspected fraud based primarily on a customer's appearance? Thomas shifted in his seat. I've flagged suspicious transactions, yes. That's part of my job. That's not what I asked, Anthony said evenly. I asked if you've made these judgments based primarily on how customers look, rather than on concrete evidence of fraud. Thomas's silence spoke volumes. Anthony addressed the room again. I want each of you to think honestly about this. Have you ever treated customers differently based on their appearance? Given some people the benefit of the doubt while being stricter with others? You don't need to answer out loud, but be honest with yourselves. The discomfort in the room was palpable as each employee reflected on their past interactions. Let me tell you something about my mother, Anthony continued, his voice softening. She came to this country with nothing but a suitcase and dreams for her future. English was her second language. She worked cleaning houses while putting herself through college. When my father died unexpectedly, leaving her with a 7-year-old son and mountains of medical debt, she never complained. She just worked harder. The room was completely silent now, every person hanging on Anthony's words. My mother taught me that dignity isn't something you earn. It's something everyone deserves, simply by virtue of being human. And yet today, in this bank, her dignity was stripped away because someone looked at her and made assumptions. Thomas stared at the table, unable to meet Anthony's eyes. The problem, Anthony continued, is that what happened to my mother happens to people every day. People who don't have a son who can walk in and demand accountability. People who just accept the humiliation and walk away, believing that's what they deserve. Diane raised her hand tentatively. Mr. Wilson, I've only been here 3 months, but I've noticed. She hesitated, glancing around at her colleagues. Go on, Anthony encouraged. This is a safe space for honest conversation. I've noticed that we seem to apply different standards to different customers, Diane said, her voice growing stronger. Large deposits from certain customers get rushed through with minimal verification, while others face extra scrutiny. It's subtle, but it's there. Several employees nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth in her words. Thank you, Diane, Anthony said. That kind of honesty is exactly what we need right now. He addressed the whole room again. Change starts with awareness. We can't address biases we refuse to acknowledge. Lisa looked troubled. Mr. Wilson, we've had diversity training. Everyone here has completed the required courses. And yet, Anthony replied, what happened this morning still happened. which suggests that our current approach isn't working. We need more than just online courses and checked boxes. We need real, meaningful change in how we operate. He walked to the whiteboard at the front of the room and picked up a marker. Let's start right now. I want us to outline specific actions we can take to ensure every customer is treated with equal respect and dignity. For the next hour, the conference room became a workshop of ideas. Initially hesitant, the employees gradually opened up, offering suggestions that ranged from revising verification protocols to implementing mystery shoppers to test for bias in customer interactions. Thomas, who had been quiet for most of the discussion, finally spoke up. What if we removed some of the subjective elements from our fraud detection process? Created more objective criteria that don't rely on the teller's feeling about a transaction? Anthony nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need. By the end of the session, the whiteboard was filled with ideas, and a new energy had replaced the earlier tension. Anthony looked at the list with satisfaction. This is an excellent start, he said, but ideas without action don't create change. So here's what's going to happen next. He turned to Lisa. Ms. Chen, I'm tasking you with implementing these changes, not just in this branch, but throughout the region. You'll report directly to me on your progress. Lisa straightened in her chair. Yes, sir. I won't let you down. Anthony then looked at Thomas. As for you, Thomas, we need to discuss your future with First National. The room went quiet again, all eyes on Thomas, who looked resigned to his fate. I'm not going to fire you, Anthony said, surprising everyone. That would be easy, but it wouldn't solve the underlying problem. Instead, I want you to be part of the solution. Thomas looked up, confusion replacing his resignation. Sir, you made a serious mistake today, Anthony said firmly. But how you respond to that mistake will define your character far more than the mistake itself. He walked closer to Thomas. I'm offering you a choice. Option 1. You can transfer to another branch, put this behind you, and continue your career as before. Option 2. You can join a new task force I'm creating to address bias in customer service across all our branches. It will mean extra work, uncomfortable conversations, and confronting your own biases, but it will also be an opportunity to make a real difference. Thomas was quiet for a moment, considering. What if I want option 2? He finally asked. Then you'll work closely with Ms. Chen and a team from our Diversity and Inclusion Department. You'll help develop new training programs based on real-world scenarios, including what happened today. You'll be expected to speak candidly about your own experience and what you've learned. Thomas nodded slowly. I want option 2, he said with newfound resolve. I want to make this right. Anthony extended his hand. Then welcome to the task force. As they shook hands, something shifted in the room, a collective exhale. A sense that something important had just happened. One more thing, Anthony said, addressing everyone. Tomorrow morning, my mother will return to this branch to deposit a new check. I expect every person here to treat her with the respect and dignity she deserves, not because she's my mother, but because she's a human being and our customer. As the meeting adjourned and employees filed out, many approached Anthony individually, thanking him for the conversation and expressing their commitment to change. Diane lingered until most had left, Mr. Wilson. She said quietly, I just wanted to say, I should have done more this morning. When I saw how Thomas was treating your mother, I should have spoken up more forcefully. Anthony regarded her thoughtfully. It's not always easy to be the one who speaks up, Diane. But you did try and you were honest today when it mattered. That counts for something. Will your mother be okay? Diane asked. She seemed really shaken. Anthony smiled slightly. My mother is stronger than she looks. She's endured far worse than an arrogant bank teller, but yes, I think she'll be okay. As Anthony left the branch, he pulled out his phone to call Gloria. The morning's events had taken an unexpected turn, but perhaps some good would come of it after all. Sometimes change required a catalyst, and today his mother had unwittingly provided one. Hey, Mom, he said when she answered. How about I come over for dinner tonight? I've got quite a story to tell you. In his car, driving away from the bank, Anthony reflected on the day's events. The incident with his mother had revealed problems that likely existed throughout the banking system, problems that affected countless customers who didn't have the power or connections to demand better treatment. But today had been a start, a small step toward a banking system where everyone would be treated with equal dignity and respect, regardless of how they looked or dressed. where assumptions would give way to facts and protocols would be followed consistently for all customers. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight. But as Anthony had learned from his mother, the most important journeys often began with a single, decisive step. 3 months had passed since the incident at First National Bank. The early autumn sunlight filtered through the trees outside the Maple Street branch as Gloria Wilson once again approached the heavy glass doors. She paused for a moment, remembering her last visit and the humiliation that had followed. But today felt different. Today she stood a little straighter, held her head a little higher. The bank had changed in subtle but noticeable ways. New signage greeted customers, emphasizing the institution's commitment to respectful service for all. The security guard at the door offered Gloria a warm smile and held the door open for her. "Good morning, ma'am. Welcome to First National." Inside, the layout was the same, but the atmosphere felt lighter somehow. Gloria joined the line, noticing that each teller station now displayed a small placard with the bank's newly implemented service promises. As she waited, she observed the interactions around her. A young man in tattered jeans was being helped with opening an account, receiving the same attentive service as the well-dressed businessman at the next window. An elderly woman with a thick accent was patiently assisted by a teller who showed no signs of frustration or hurry. "Mrs. Wilson?" Gloria turned to find Lisa Chen approaching with a warm smile. "I thought that was you," Lisa said. "It's so good to see you again." "How are you today?" "I'm well, thank you," Gloria replied, slightly surprised to be remembered by the branch manager. "We've been hoping you'd come back to visit us," Lisa said. "Would you prefer to use my office for your transaction today?" "It's more private." Gloria shook her head. "No, thank you. I'm happy to wait in line like everyone else." Lisa nodded, understanding the significance of Gloria's choice. "Of course. Please let me know if you need anything at all." As Lisa walked away, Gloria noticed several employees glancing in her direction with curious expressions. Word of her identity and what had happened 3 months ago had clearly spread throughout the branch. She wondered if they also knew about the changes her son had implemented since then. After Anthony's visit that day, things had moved quickly. A bank-wide review of service practices had been ordered. New verification protocols were established that relied less on teller discretion and more on objective criteria. Mystery shoppers of diverse backgrounds were sent to branches across the country to test for bias in customer interactions. But perhaps most significantly, First National had launched a new training program, one developed with input from Thomas himself. The program used real-world scenarios, including what had happened to Gloria, to help employees recognize and address their unconscious biases. When Gloria reached the front of the line, she found herself facing a familiar teller. Thomas looked up, recognition flooding his face. "Mrs. Wilson," he said, his voice carrying a new note of humility. "Welcome back," Gloria offered a small smile. "Thank you, Thomas." There was an awkward pause as the weight of their last interaction hung between them. "How can I help you today?" Thomas finally asked. Gloria opened her purse and pulled out a check, not from her son this time, but her monthly pension payment. As she slid it across the counter, she noticed Thomas's hands trembling slightly. "I'd like to deposit this, please," she said simply. Thomas nodded and began processing the transaction with careful attention to detail. His movements were deliberate, almost reverent. "Mrs. Wilson," he said quietly as he worked, "I've been hoping you would come back so I could apologize properly. What I did that day was inexcusable. I'm truly sorry." Gloria studied his face, seeing genuine remorse there. "Thank you for saying that, Thomas. I appreciate it." "Your son could have had me fired," Thomas continued. "Most people in his position would have. Instead, he gave me a chance to learn and do better." He glanced up briefly. "He's a remarkable man." "Yes," Gloria agreed with a mother's pride. "He is. He told me about all you did for him," Thomas said. "Working multiple jobs, putting him through college. I didn't see any of that when you stood here 3 months ago. I just saw what you expected to see," Gloria finished for him when he trailed off. Thomas nodded. "Exactly." As Thomas completed her transaction, Gloria noticed Diane at a nearby desk watching their interaction with interest. The young woman who had tried to intervene on her behalf that day offered a warm smile and a small wave. "Your deposit is all set, Mrs. Wilson," Thomas said, handing her the receipt. "Is there anything else I can help you with today?" No, thank you, Gloria replied. But I am curious about something. My son mentioned you're working on a special project now? Thomas straightened slightly. Yes, ma'am. I'm part of a task force addressing bias in customer service. We're developing training programs based on real experiences. He hesitated. Actually, if you ever had time, we would be honored to hear your perspective. Your story has already changed how we operate, but hearing it directly from you would be incredibly valuable. The request surprised Gloria. You want me to talk about what happened? Only if you're comfortable, Thomas assured her quickly. But yes, your experience could help ensure other customers don't face what you did. Gloria considered this. The thought of revisiting that humiliating day wasn't appealing. But if it could prevent someone else from experiencing the same treatment, I'll think about it, she promised. As Gloria turned to leave, Lisa approached again. Mrs. Wilson, before you go, there's someone who would like to meet you. She gestured toward a young woman in a smart business suit who stood nearby. This is Kimberly Jackson, our new regional director of customer experience. She's been implementing many of the changes your son initiated. Kimberly extended her hand warmly. Mrs. Wilson, it's an honor to meet you. Your experience has been the catalyst for some of the most significant positive changes in our bank's history. Gloria shook her hand, somewhat bemused by the attention. I'm glad something good came of it. More than you know, Kimberly assured her. What happened to you highlighted problems that affected countless customers. Now, we're addressing those problems systematically across all our branches. As Gloria chatted with Kimberly, she noticed other customers in the bank, being helped with the same care and respect she was now receiving. An older man in worn clothes was depositing a large insurance check without any raised eyebrows. A young woman in a hijab was discussing loan options with a financial advisor who listened attentively. When Gloria finally left the bank, she felt a sense of closure. What had begun as a humiliating experience had somehow transformed into something positive, not just for her, but potentially for thousands of other customers who would never know her name or her story. Outside, she pulled out her phone to call Anthony. Hey, Mom, he answered on the first ring. How did it go? Better than I expected, Gloria replied, smiling as she walked toward the bus stop. That young man, Thomas, apologized very sincerely. I'm glad to hear it, Anthony said. He's actually been doing good work on the task force. Surprisingly good, in fact. He mentioned that, Gloria said. He asked if I'd be willing to share my story as part of their training. Anthony paused. You don't have to do that, Mom. You've already been through enough. I know I don't have to, Gloria replied. But I think I might want to. If it helps make things better for other people, it would be worth it. As Gloria waited for her bus, she reflected on how a single interaction had spiraled into something much larger. Her son had always talked about wanting to make meaningful change in the banking industry, to make it more accessible and equitable for everyone. Who would have thought that her humiliation would provide the push needed to start that process? 6 weeks later, Gloria stood at a podium in the First National Bank's downtown headquarters. Before her sat nearly 100 employees from branches across the region, including Thomas and Lisa from the Maple Street branch. Good morning, she began, her teacher's voice carrying clearly through the room. My name is Gloria Wilson. 3 months ago, I walked into one of your branches to deposit a check, and was treated like a criminal. She paused, looking out at the sea of attentive faces. What I experienced that day was painful and humiliating, but what's happened since then has given that experience meaning. Today I'm not here to dwell on the past. I'm here to help shape the future. A future where every person who walks through your doors is treated with the same respect and dignity, regardless of how they look or what they're wearing. As Gloria shared her story, she felt a weight lifting. The humiliation of that day was transforming into something powerful, something that might help ensure others wouldn't face the same treatment. In the back of the room, Anthony stood quietly, watching his mother with pride. She had taught him many lessons throughout his life, about perseverance, dignity, and standing up for what was right. Today she was teaching those same lessons to an entire organization. After the presentation, as employees lined up to thank Gloria and share their own insights, Thomas approached Anthony. Your mother is remarkable, he said. I keep thinking about how differently things could have gone that day if I'd just taken the time to really see her, to listen instead of judge. Anthony nodded. That's the essence of what we're trying to change. creating a culture where people truly see each other as human beings first, not as walking stereotypes. We still have a long way to go, Thomas acknowledged, but at least we've started. Outside the building afterward, Gloria hugged her son goodbye before heading home. You know, she said thoughtfully, when I was standing in that bank 3 months ago feeling so small and embarrassed, I never imagined I'd end up addressing a room full of bankers about how to treat people better. Anthony smiled. You've been teaching people all your life, Mom. Just a different classroom now. As Gloria rode the bus home, she thought about the ripple effects of that day at the bank. One interaction, one moment of disrespect had led to examination, accountability, and ultimately change. The new verification protocols were being implemented nationwide. The training program featuring her story was being rolled out to all branches. First National was even partnering with other banks to share what they'd learned. Sometimes, Gloria reflected, the most powerful catalyst for change was simply revealing the truth of how things really were. By standing in her truth, first in humiliation, then in dignity, she had helped set in motion changes that would benefit countless others. It wasn't the legacy she had imagined for herself after 35 years of teaching elementary school, but perhaps it was just as important. After all, she had always taught her students that every person deserves respect, that appearances can be deceiving, and that it's never too late to learn and grow. It seemed some lessons were universal, whether taught in a third-grade classroom or a corporate boardroom. And some teachers, like Gloria Wilson, never really stopped teaching, even when they least expected to be called back to service.